What truly determines success in life? Is it being born with natural talent, the relentless effort of hard work, or the unseen lessons found in everyday struggles and failures that gradually shape ordinary people into wiser, stronger, and more resilient versions of themselves? The phone call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. "Is this Lisa Chen?" the nurse asked. "You're listed as the emergency contact for Michael Chen." My heart stopped. My 16-year-old brother had been in a car accident. Drunk driver. Michael was alive, but barely. Traumatic brain injury, multiple surgeries ahead, and a prognosis that shattered everything I thought I knew about our future. I was 22, fresh out of college with a marketing degree, living paycheck to paycheck in a studio apartment. Michael was the gifted one in our family. Straight A's without studying, captain of the debate team, already accepted to Stanford with a full scholarship. Everyone always said Michael had it, that natural intelligence and charisma that made teachers love him and colleges compete for him. I was the one who studied until 3 a.m. for B's while he breezed through AP classes like they were elementary worksheets. Now I was sitting in a hospital room, holding the hand of someone who might never be the same again, while our parents flew back from their business trip overseas. The next few months will determine a lot about his recovery, Dr. Martinez explained. Brain injury rehabilitation requires consistent support, someone who can help him relearn basic skills. It's going to be a long, difficult process. My parents arrived devastated but realistic about their limitations. Dad's consulting work required constant travel, and Mom was launching a startup that demanded 60-hour weeks. They could provide financial support, but they couldn't provide the daily care Michael needed. "Lisa, I know this is asking a lot," Mom said, "but you're the only one who can be here consistently. We'll cover all the medical expenses and support you financially, but Michael needs someone who won't give up on him," I finished. I quit my entry-level marketing job the next day. For the next 6 months, I lived between our parents' house and the rehabilitation center, learning to be Michael's advocate, coach, and sometimes his memory when his own failed him. The Michael who emerged from his coma wasn't the effortlessly brilliant brother I'd grown up with. He struggled to remember words that had once flowed naturally. Mathematical concepts that he'd understood intuitively now required careful explanation and repetition. The confidence that had made him magnetic was replaced by frustration and fear. "Lisa, I used to be smart," he said one afternoon during physical therapy, tears streaming down his face. "What if I never get it back?" "Michael, you're still smart," I said, gripping his hand. "You're just learning to be smart in a different way now." But honestly, I wasn't sure I believed my own words. The breakthrough came 3 months into rehabilitation, when Michael's speech therapist, Patricia Williams, made an observation that changed how I thought about intelligence and capability. "Lisa, I've been watching how you work with Michael," she said after a particularly difficult session. "You have a gift for breaking down complex concepts into steps he can follow. You're intuitive about when to push and when to back off. Have you considered that this might be more than just being a good sister?" "What do you mean?" "I mean you're demonstrating skills that many professional therapists take years to develop. You understand learning in a way that can't be taught from textbooks." Patricia suggested I consider training as a rehabilitation therapist. "You've learned to see ability where others see deficit, to find alternative pathways when the obvious ones don't work. That's exactly what this field needs." The idea seemed impossible. I'd majored in marketing, not psychology or healthcare. I didn't have the natural academic gifts that Michael had always displayed. But watching Michael struggle to relearn everything from tying his shoes to solving basic math problems had taught me something crucial. Intelligence wasn't fixed, and learning wasn't linear. Every day I saw Michael's brain finding new pathways around damaged areas. He developed strategies for remembering things by associating them with music. He learned to solve math problems by drawing pictures when abstract thinking failed him. He compensated for processing speed issues by organizing information more systematically. "Michael, you're not getting your old intelligence back," I told him one evening. "You're building a new kind of intelligence, and it might be better than the old one." "How can this be better?" he asked, frustrated by a homework assignment that would have taken him minutes before the accident. "Because now you understand how learning actually works. You know what it feels like when your brain has to fight for every piece of information. That's going to make you understand other people's struggles in ways you never could before." 18 months after the accident, Michael had recovered enough to start community college part-time. He'd never be the effortless student he'd been before, but he'd become something more valuable. Someone who understood that intelligence was about persistence and adaptation, not just natural ability. Meanwhile, I'd been accepted into a graduate program for rehabilitation counseling, with my experience caring for Michael serving as both qualification and motivation. "Your personal statement was remarkable," said Dr. Jennifer Foster during my admissions interview. "You understand something about recovery and resilience that most students have to learn through years of clinical experience. Graduate school was challenging, but my experience with Michael had taught me that struggling with material didn't mean I wasn't capable of mastering it. It just meant I needed to approach it differently." While classmates who'd been naturally gifted in undergrad sometimes struggled when courses required deep empathy and practical problem solving, I found that my years of figuring out how to help Michael navigate his challenges had prepared me for exactly this kind of work. My thesis research focused on family members who became informal therapists for relatives with brain injuries. What I discovered challenged conventional thinking about who was qualified to provide rehabilitation support. Family caregivers, despite lacking formal training, often achieved remarkable results because they understood the patient's personality, motivation, and learning style in ways that clinical professionals couldn't access quickly. "Lisa, your research suggests that love and persistence might be as important as technical training and rehabilitation outcomes," Dr. Foster told me. "That's a profound finding." The real validation came when Michael decided to change his major from pre-med to special education. "Lisa, watching you help me recover taught me something I never learned when school was easy," he said. "I learned that the most important skill isn't being smart, it's helping other people discover their own capabilities." Michael had transformed from someone who'd never struggled academically into someone who understood struggle intimately. His brain injury hadn't taken away his intelligence, it had deepened it. After graduation, I was hired by the same rehabilitation center where Michael had recovered. But instead of working with patients who had conditions similar to his, I was assigned to develop programs for family caregivers. "We've realized that family members often become the most effective long-term support for our patients," explained Dr. Rodriguez, the center director. "But we've never systematically trained them or recognized their contributions. Your background gives you unique insight into both perspectives." The caregiver education program I developed trained family members in basic rehabilitation techniques while also helping them understand that their emotional investment was a therapeutic asset, not a professional liability. The results were remarkable. Patients whose families completed the program showed faster recovery times and better long-term outcomes than those receiving only professional care. But the moment that crystallized everything came when I received a call from Stanford University. "Ms. Chen, we're developing a new program in rehabilitation science that combines clinical training with lived experience," said Dr. Patricia Kim. "Your work training family caregivers has attracted national attention. We'd like you to help design a curriculum that bridges the gap between academic knowledge and practical wisdom." 5 years after that devastating phone call, I was being recruited by one of the country's top universities to help reshape how rehabilitation professionals were trained. The program we developed at Stanford required all students to work closely with family caregivers, learning from people who'd navigated recovery challenges firsthand. "What we're discovering," I told the first class of graduate students, "is that the most effective therapists aren't necessarily those with the highest test scores or the most natural aptitude. They're the ones who understand that recovery is as much about adapting to challenges as it is about overcoming them." Michael joined the program as a guest lecturer, sharing his perspective on what it felt like to relearn everything he'd once taken for granted. "Before my accident, I thought intelligence was about how quickly you could process information," he told the students. "Now I know that real intelligence is about how creatively you can find solutions when the obvious approaches don't work." The Stanford program attracted students who'd had their own experiences with disability, illness, or family caregiving, people who might not have been considered ideal candidates under traditional admission criteria, but who brought invaluable perspectives to the field. Maria Santos had cared for her mother with Alzheimer's while completing her undergraduate degree. James Foster had managed his own chronic illness while working full-time. Sarah Kim had helped her brother recover from a stroke. "These students understand something that can't be taught from textbooks," Dr. Kim observed. "They know what it feels like when normal approaches don't work, and they're creative about finding alternatives." The program's success led to similar initiatives at other universities, and I found myself consulting on rehabilitation education programs across the country. But the recognition that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Dr. Martinez, the neurologist who delivered Michael's devastating prognosis 7 years earlier, invited me to speak at a medical conference about family involvement in brain injury recovery. "Lisa, when I met you in that hospital room, I saw you as a well-meaning but untrained family member who would need to step aside for professional intervention, he said before my presentation. I never imagined that your lack of formal training would become your greatest asset in helping Michael recover. He paused, looking at the conference program that listed my credentials and achievements. What you've taught the medical community is that sometimes the most qualified person to help someone heal isn't the person with the most degrees. It's the person who cares the most about the outcome and is willing to learn whatever it takes to help. Today, Michael teaches special education at an inner-city middle school, working with students who've been told they can't learn in traditional ways. His own experience relearning everything has made him exceptionally skilled at finding alternative approaches when standard methods fail. My brain injury was the worst thing that ever happened to me, he often tells his students, but it was also the most educational thing that ever happened to me. It taught me that there's always another way to learn something if you're willing to keep trying. I direct the Family Caregiver Institute at Stanford, training family members to become effective advocates and informal therapists for their loved ones. Our graduates work in hospitals and rehabilitation centers nationwide, bringing lived experience to professional healthcare settings. When people ask me what truly determines success in life, I share what 7 years of helping Michael recover taught me. Natural talent creates early advantages and opens initial opportunities. Hard work builds competence and sustains long-term progress. But the unseen lessons found in everyday struggles and failures, those experiences gradually shape ordinary people into wiser, stronger, and more resilient versions of themselves. The phone call that seemed to end everything actually began everything meaningful we've both accomplished since. Michael's brain injury didn't take away his potential. It redirected his potential toward work that required the very capabilities his struggles had developed. My interrupted marketing career wasn't a sacrifice. It was preparation for work I was meant to do all along. The struggles that felt like obstacles were actually education in the skills that success would eventually require: persistence, adaptability, empathy, and the understanding that people's greatest challenges often contain the seeds of their greatest contributions. Michael still keeps a journal that he started during his recovery. Recently, he read me an entry from his darkest period. I used to think I was smart because things came easily to me. Now I'm learning that being smart means figuring out how to make difficult things possible. Looking back, that might be the wisest thing either of us has ever learned. The full impact of this wisdom became clear 3 years ago, when I received a call that would test everything we'd discovered about transforming struggle into strength on a much larger scale. Dr. Chen, this is Minister Patricia Wong from the Department of Health and Human Services. We're facing a national crisis in caregiver support, and your work at Stanford has caught our attention. The aging population meant millions of families were becoming informal caregivers without training or support. Traditional healthcare systems were overwhelmed, and family members were burning out trying to provide care they felt unqualified to give. What we need, Minister Wong explained, is a national framework for recognizing and developing family caregivers as partners in healthcare rather than obstacles to professional care. The 18-month study that followed took me to rural communities, urban hospitals, and suburban nursing homes, documenting what I'd learned from Michael's recovery, that family caregivers often possessed insights and motivation that formal training couldn't replicate. In rural Montana, I met Janet Rodriguez, whose husband had suffered a stroke. The nearest rehabilitation center was 300 miles away, so Janet had become his primary therapist out of necessity. I was terrified at first, Janet told me. I kept thinking the professionals would do it better, but I realized something. I knew Luis in ways they never could. I knew what motivated him, what frustrated him, how to communicate when words wouldn't come. Working with Janet, we documented her techniques and developed training modules that combined her intuitive approaches with clinical best practices. Within 6 months, Luis had recovered function that his initial prognosis said was impossible. Dr. Chen, you helped me understand that love isn't unprofessional. It's a therapeutic tool when it's combined with knowledge, Janet said. In Chicago, I worked with Maria Santos, whose teenage daughter had been paralyzed in a diving accident. Maria had quit her job to provide care, but felt overwhelmed by the complexity of her daughter's needs. Everyone talks about quality of life, but what does that mean for a 16-year-old who was planning to be a dancer? Maria asked during our first meeting. Together, we developed adaptive approaches that honored her daughter's identity while addressing her physical limitations. Maria learned to see herself not as a replacement for professional care, but as the expert on her daughter's dreams, fears, and motivations. You taught me something crucial, Maria told me months later. I thought my job was to help my daughter accept her limitations, but my real job was to help her discover new possibilities. These experiences across the country revealed patterns that revolutionized how I thought about healthcare and human potential. Family caregivers who'd been forced to adapt to impossible circumstances often developed innovations that professional settings hadn't considered. They found creative solutions because conventional approaches weren't accessible to them. They persisted through setbacks because giving up wasn't an option. What we're discovering, I reported to the federal task force, is that necessity-driven caregiving often produces better long-term outcomes than purely professional interventions, not despite the lack of formal training, but because of the deep personal investment and adaptive creativity it requires. The National Family Caregiver Recognition Act that resulted established training programs, support networks, and professional recognition for family caregivers as healthcare partners. But the provision I was most proud of required medical schools and nursing programs to include training on how to collaborate with family caregivers rather than replace them. We're not trying to turn family members into healthcare professionals, I testified before Congress. We're trying to help healthcare professionals recognize that family members often possess unique qualifications that formal education can't provide. The program rollout began with pilot sites in 10 states. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Patients with trained family caregivers showed faster recovery times, lower readmission rates, and higher satisfaction scores. Michael joined the national training team, sharing his perspective on what it felt like to be the patient whose family member had to learn specialized care. Lisa didn't just help me recover, he told groups of new family caregivers. She showed me that recovery isn't about getting back to who you were. It's about discovering who you can become when you have someone who refuses to give up on your potential. The success stories weren't limited to physical rehabilitation. Families dealing with mental illness, chronic conditions, and developmental disabilities reported similar breakthroughs when family caregivers were properly supported and recognized. The recognition that crystallized everything came when the World Health Organization invited me to present our findings at the International Conference on Family-Centered Care in Geneva. Standing before healthcare leaders from 43 countries, I shared research that was reshaping how the world thought about caregiving and recovery. We've discovered something profound about human resilience, I told the international audience. The people who achieve the most remarkable recoveries aren't always those with the best medical care or the most natural advantages. They're those whose families have learned to see challenges as problems to solve rather than limitations to accept. The conference response led to pilot programs in 12 countries, adapting our family caregiver model to different healthcare systems and cultural contexts. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka from Japan's Ministry of Health approached me afterward. In our culture, family caregiving is traditional, but we've never systematically developed it as a professional skill. Your research shows us how to honor tradition while improving outcomes. The international collaboration revealed that the principles we discovered were universal: love combined with knowledge, persistence guided by hope, and the recognition that every challenge contained opportunities for growth and innovation. But the moment that brought everything full circle came last month, when I received a letter from a young woman named Ashley Chen. No relation, despite the shared surname. Dr. Chen, she wrote, I wanted you to know that your work saved my relationship with my brother. When David had his brain injury last year, I thought I was unqualified to help him, but your training program taught me that my love for him wasn't a limitation. It was my qualification. David is starting college next month, majoring in rehabilitation counseling because he wants to help other families discover what we learned. That our worst moments can become our most educational moments if we're willing to learn from them. Reading Ashley's letter, I thought about the scared 22-year-old who'd received that devastating phone call 7 years earlier. She'd thought her brother's accident was the end of both their promising futures. She couldn't have known that their struggles would become their qualifications, that their pain would become their purpose, that their recovery would teach them how to help others discover resilience they never knew they possessed. The phone call that seemed to shatter everything had actually revealed everything that mattered. That success isn't about avoiding challenges, but about learning to transform challenges into capabilities that can benefit not just ourselves, but everyone whose lives we touch.